Welcome, everyone. Uh, you're here tonight for the Grotto night at the library. Tonight's theme is Baycentric, exploring stories set in the Bay Area. I'm Valentin Porras, the manager for the first floor fiction and genre room. Let me begin with the land acknowledgement. The San Francisco Public Library acknowledges that we occupied unceded ancestral home of the Mayatushi Ohlone people, who are original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on the traditional homeland. An uninvited guest, we affirm their salvage rights as first people, in which to pay our respects to the ancestral elders and relatives of the Rapchashani community. Before we get started, I hope you will join us next month. When bad people do good things, writing the acknowledged with Grotto members Mina Doublet, Terry Tarani, Brad, I can pronounce his last name, sorry, and Janie Novak. I will hand it over to Dominic Lin.
Hi, thank you, Valentin, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. I am a member of the Writers Grotto. My name is Dominic Lim, and I'll be one of our panelists and your moderator for tonight. But first, before we begin, let me introduce the Grotto for those of you who don't know. We are a group of working writers and narrative artists who connect in physical and as well as virtual space. We support each other, we mentor and teach others, and we try to foster a literary community and culture that is generous in spirit and deeply inclusive. We like to elevate writers of all backgrounds. The Grotto has classes and programs for all kinds of writers and literary citizens, so please check out our website, writersgrotto.com, and sign up for our newsletter. We're also on social media, I think everything except TikTok at this point, and learn about our ever-changing roster of classes and events, because we have something for everyone. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to my esteemed colleague, Lori Ann Doyle, who will introduce our first reader.
Thanks so much, Dom, and thanks so much to the San Francisco Public Library. Before I introduce Doug, I just want to make a quick announcement. I unexpectedly had knee surgery about 3 weeks ago, so I may go off camera for a bit now and then, and please excuse me in advance for that. But more importantly, I am honored to introduce Doug Henderson, who is the author of the novel The Cleveland Heights LBGTQ Sci-Fi and Fantasy Role-Playing Club, and a winner of the Penn Dow Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers. His work has appeared in the Iowa Review, Short Edition, Michigan Quarterly Review, Mixtape, and elsewhere. Originally from Cleveland, he lives in San Francisco with his husband and 2 children. Take it away, Doug.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm also very honored and thrilled to be here. It's really great. So because we're reading stories set in the Bay Area, I'm going to read my Bart Lines short story. This was one of the winners of the Bart Lines short story contest. It exists in the short story machine at some of the BART stations. If you spam the Bart Lines short story button, my story may print out and you can read it when you're riding on the train. So this is my story. It's called More. I'm going to actually read from the printout, which is not very well printed, so please forgive me. More. After rushing to catch her train, all Laura wanted was to close her eyes and zone out. She was late for work and people were crammed onto Bart, but she managed to find a spot near the door where she could lean and stand in the corner. She dropped her backpack at her feet and adjusted her earbuds. The people next to her wouldn't shut up, though. 2 women and a guy, obviously co-workers at a startup. I haven't even signed a permanent contract, the guy was saying. I just hope they give me at least a 70. because I'm at 65 now and it sucks. I'm at 70, so they should, said the blonde woman. Her blue bag kept rubbing against Laura's arm. That's how tightly everyone was packed into the train. I just got bumped up to 75, said the other woman. She was shorter with darker hair and dark eyes. I couldn't live on 70. I had to go to them and be like, I need more if I'm going to stay here. Even 75 is like, what the fuck? A coffee in this town is $6. How can anyone live on 70, let alone 65? God. I know, the guy said. Coffee is so expensive here. Why is it so expensive? He was sort of Laura's type, dark, messy hair, a starter beard, thick-rimmed glasses, but the way he was standing, with his shoulders drooped and rounded, and, and the way he kept pushing up his glasses while talking in this mousy kind of way, totally turned her off, sorry. It's expensive because it's good, the blonde-haired woman said. I used to live in Seattle, so I know. The coffee there, I mean, it's almost as good as it is here, but here is better. Laura wasn't sure how she felt about that. Everything is better here, the guy said, because it's California. Because it's San Francisco, the dark-haired woman corrected. Nothing basic can survive. This Laura could agree with. They were all slightly older than Laura, post-college, and the thought that they were the future she had to look forward to, either by working with people like them or worse, becoming like them, put a knot in her stomach. She still had to get through college, still had to find a real job, and then what? With the way things were going in the world, she wondered why she bothered to get out of bed some days, let alone think about her future. Would society even survive that long? I hope they give you at least 70, said the dark-haired girl. The guy replied with a smile, and for a moment he looked so sweet that Laura felt bad for him. How could such a naive, innocent person survive in the world? The guy had either bought his clothes one size too small or shrunk them in the wash. His sweatshirt rode up as he held onto the bar above him, and Laura could see a swath of his hairy stomach. Treasure trails always turned her on, embarrassingly. She tried not to look as he swayed with the motion of the train, but she couldn't help herself. I hope they at least give you a contract, the blonde said with a snort. Me too. I've liked working with you gals. I know, both girls said at once in a cooing kind of voice that made Laura gag. When the train arrived at Palace Station, Laura moved through the doors and away from the coworkers without giving them another glance. She wouldn't end up like them. There was no way. She wanted to travel, maybe study dance somewhere, but somewhere cool where she'd have to push herself, really earn it and sweat. She didn't want to work in tech or make a ton of money. She hated money, that it even existed, that people had to have piles of it to do anything. She climbed out of the station. She thought about making $70,000 a year, or 65, or even 40. She could do so much with 40. She walked into the coffee shop on the corner where she worked. She tucked her earbuds in her backpack as she stepped behind the counter and said hi to everyone. She wouldn't even know what to do with 70. She should have told that guy with the glasses and the treasure trail, that guy who couldn't live on $65,000 a year. She should have told him to come to her cafe. She'd give him coffee, free coffee. She'd give them all free coffee. Fuck the system. What did she care? She tied on her black apron and looked at the line of customers waiting on the other side of the counter. Who's next?
Thank you so much, Doug. That was great. You've captured a real slice of San Francisco there, a moving slice in many ways. So I'm going to inaugurate what it will be a pattern through the reading, which is one of the Grotto members will read, and then another will ask a question. So my question for Doug is, where did the idea for this story come from?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, my husband and I would trade watching the kids. I would have like an hour, maybe 2 hours. I would go to a cafe and I would write. And I had no idea what I was writing. I was working on new short stories, a collection that I was titling it Notes from the Miscast because I lived in the Mission Castro and we call it the Miscast. So I was writing about all these characters, living in my neighborhood. And that line, I had to go to them and ask for more. that was something that I overheard. And so I just took that line and I sort of built this story around it. I always like to sort of write at the ground level, if that makes sense, and sort of write about sort of normal, sort of average, everyday kind of people. And so what is that experience like? And for me, as like a writer, as like a artist in San Francisco, to hear someone asking for more, I don't know, so gutsy and just triggered a whole story, obviously. Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, next up, Dominic Lim. Dominic Lim's debut, All the Right Notes, was named the best book of 2023 by over 15 publications, including USA Today, Booklist, Library Journal, and Entertainment Weekly. His follow-up, Karaoke Queen, is a 2024 Amazon Editor's Pick. Dominic is a member of the Writers Grotto and co-hosts the long-running Babylon Salon reading series in San Francisco. He holds a Master of Music from Indiana University Jacobs School of Music, is an alum of Oberlin College and Conservatory of Music, and is a proud Actors Equity Association member. He lives in Oakland with his loving husband and their whiny cat, Phoebe. Dominic.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for your reading. I am going to read from my second novel, which is Karaoke Queen. I know it looks backwards. And this novel takes place all over the Bay Area, but primarily in the East Bay. And this scene that I'm going to read from takes place in San Leandro, although a lot of it's also in Oakland, Berkeley, and Orinda, and even Emeryville. So for those of you who don't know, Karaoke Queen is, I like to say, the first traditionally published rom-com to feature a drag queen as the main protagonist. And in this scene, the protagonist, Rex Araneta, is in high school. He's a budding drag queen, and he has discovered that his uncle, Tito Melboy, is also a drag queen. And so this is the scene where Tito Melboy basically becomes Rex's drag mother. I pulled out my stash of clothes, shoes, wigs, and makeup from the secret suitcase at the back of my closet. Tito Melboy sifted through everything. How long have you been collecting all of this? He asked. Ever since Mom started taking me shopping, 3 years now. You've been doing drag for 3 years? Longer. Before that, I was just stealing stuff from Mom. Since you were just a child, I guess talent must really run in your family then, although I think it skipped your dad. He's good at making other kinds of things, I guess. Does he know about this? No. Good. He picked up one of my wigs, a fluffy blonde piece, and poked his fingers through the large curls. He wouldn't approve. Here was that connection Mom had been talking about. Is that why you and Dad don't get along? I asked quietly. He found out about my drag and got super mad. Mom says it has something to do with you. Is it because you're bakla? I was afraid of Tito Melboy's answer. I didn't want to hear that my father disliked me for the same reason he had stopped talking to his kuya, because he was gay. Melboy sat on my small bed, making it groan under his weight. Not because of that, Rex. Well, not exactly because of that. You should understand, when I was growing up in the Philippines, being bakla was not exactly the same as being gay here. In the States, if you are gay, you can be a lot of different ways, diba? You can be macho. In fact, the more straight acting you are here, the more desirable. I learned this when I came here. But when I was a boy in the Philippines, if a bakla person was masculine, people would get confused. They would think he was being dishonest, trying to be someone he is not. That's because people expect us mga bakla to be feminine. And since I always acted more like a woman, well, I was not always understood, but I was more tolerated and sometimes even loved. Even by my dad? Oh, yes, especially your dad. He never cared that I was bakla. In fact, no one in our family did. Your Lola died when we were little, so I helped your Lolo around the house. I took care of your dad and your Tito Reg. I cooked, I cleaned, I mended their clothes. They considered me their big sister, their ate. Actually, your dad, he was my biggest protector. He would always stand up for me against the neighborhood bullies. So why did he get so mad at you? Tito Melboy reached up, pulled off the elastic tie that held up his long hair and let it cascade down. As he talked, he pulled his fingers through the long black strands. We didn't have enough money growing up, Rex. What we were making selling food at the carts on the street was not enough. So I began to look for ways to earn extra cash. I began to dress fully in women's clothing and perform at bars. I was making a lot of money, but I was also getting into things I should not have. Drinking, staying out late, and I had so many suitors. Some of them were not such good guys. I sometimes got attracted to the rough types, the ones who are bad news. It got to the point where I was barely home anymore. I fought with your Lolo about it, and then I left home. Your dad was maybe around your age at the time, and he blamed me for abandoning him, which I guess is true. Something on Tito's face closed off, becoming hard. He stayed quiet for so long that I assumed he was done telling his story. He blinked a few times and turned to me. Why don't we have a little tutoring session tomorrow when your parents are at work, huh? Just don't tell your dad. I nodded and smiled wide at Tito Milboy. He pulled me into his arms and gave me one of his everlasting hugs. Our first drag lesson was on a scorcher of a summer day, the kind where there was so much heat it became visible coming off the pavement in waves. It was so hot that my parents gave us permission to turn on the air conditioning before they left for work instead of just using the fans to save money. Trust me, Rex, you'll be glad when we get to use the aircon today. Drag is a mixing of adding and subtracting, but mostly adding. You will have to get used to performing in hot circumstances, in many layers under heavy lights or outdoors in summer events. But for now, we can stay comfy. He retrieved a large aluminum carrying case from one of his suitcases and flipped the latch open with a clack. I gasped when he opened it, revealing multiple levels that spread out like a butterfly unfurling its wings. One day I buy you your own case, he said, winking. We sat at my desk with our respective makeup sets and lighted mirrors. As Tito Melboy went through his routine, I followed and copied him. I asked questions when I didn't understand something he was doing, but mostly I watched and listened as he told his stories. He'd learned a lot in his many years working the gay nightclubs in Manila and had even established his own house of queens. Since his drag persona was Boku Buko, he called it the House of Buko. Back then, I was like Buko, baby coconut, he explained as he blended in his concealer, young, juicy, and sweet. Trust me, those men couldn't get enough of me. I giggled. You did say you had a lot of boyfriends. Yes, Tito Melboy said, his contour brush hovering over his cheekbone. And not all of them were bad news. Some were actually very kind to me. Do you have a novio yet, Rex? I frowned, forcing wrinkles into the streaks of foundation around my eyes. No, and I probably won't ever. Not looking like this. No, don't say that, Pamangkin. It's true. Maybe in the Philippines it's different. People appreciate baklas there. Ha! Tito Melboy guffawed, a sound so abrupt that I dropped my blender sponge. What? I was confused. I thought you said no one cared that you were bakla. No one in our family, Rex. I had my, what do you call them here? Haters, he said. Actually, did you know that people in the Philippines used to be more open-minded when it came to us mga bakla? Many years ago, before the Americans came, even before the Spanish came, people like us were respected, even revered. Some say that the word bakla is a mixture of babae, meaning woman, and lalaki, meaning man, because we were the best of both, as well as something beyond, a mix of masculine and feminine. A lot of people who were bakla were part of the babaylan or spiritual leaders. And in that way, I think we still carry on that tradition. We are performers, what we don't just entertain, diba? We uplift, we inspire, we are special, you and I, Rex. And one day, I know with all my heart, you will find someone who sees that about you as much as I do.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom.
Yeah.
So, what has the reader response been to your novels being set here in the Bay Area?
Yeah, it's surprisingly well, I've people have actually responded to me about, and I never thought really that much about setting it in the Bay Area. All the Right Notes is based in the Bay Area and New York because it takes place in Martinez and Pleasant Hill. Although I don't mention it, I make up the name of the city. And then, of course, I mentioned Karaoke Queen takes place here. And the comment I get the most is people who are really, really happy that I set a novel in the East Bay, because a lot of times, well, a lot of times when a book is based in the Bay Area, it is about San Francisco. And so having shout outs to places in Oakland and Concord and Hayward, I mean, there you don't really get that enough, I think, or ever. I've never read. So it's fun to get comments like in reviews or people coming up to me at panels going, thank you so much for representing Hayward or whatever it is. And it's just a kind of a reminder that, you know, not every novel can take place in a metropolis like New York or LA or Chicago or whatever. It's sometimes great. It can take place in a little town like, well, Cleveland's not little, but I mean, it's a atypical setting, Doug,
Right,
which I
yeah.
loved about
Or
your
Cleveland
novel.
Heights, even more so, you know. Yeah.
Oh, Cleveland Heights. That's right. That's right. Cleveland
Yeah.
Heights. So yeah, I mean, I think that's important to remember that we need to represent for all the people living in the small towns too.
Yeah, I completely agree,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. Thanks so much, Dom.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So Kathy, Catherine Seligman is an award-winning journalist and author who has been a reporter at USA Today, the San Francisco Examiner, and a staff writer at the San Francisco Chronicle Sunday magazine. Her work has been featured on NPR and in Life, Redbook, The Sun magazine, the anthology Fresh Takes, Best American Essays, and elsewhere. Her debut novel, At the Edge of the Hate, won the Penn Bellwether Prize, and she lives in San Francisco.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you. And I'm going to read from the book, At the Edge of the Hate, which takes place in San Francisco, of course. And a lot of it takes place in Golden Gate Park. So I wanted to read a section that really is in the park and of the park. Hope was all but swallowed by her lumped-up sleeping bag, snuggled against a twisted trunk at the top of 40 Hill where we slept. Ash had staked it out, strung up empty beer bottles on the biggest tree, along every branch he could reach. On windy days, they clanked and jangled. You could hear them down at the lake, but you couldn't see us. We'd worn a trail on the flattened leaves, through the bushes, and up to the center of a small, wind-blown circle of trees, all of them listed to one side, blown by the constant wind off the ocean, like they'd been groping for something and then stopped before they got it. We slept below in the spongy mattress of leaves and dirt. I took down the sleeping bag that I'd hung on a branch along with a coat I'd found at the shelter. Hope had slung a plastic bag of her things nearby. I didn't want to know what was in there. She hoarded. I kept bugging her not to tie food up in our trees, to put it in the cart we'd parked down the hill so the raccoons wouldn't bother us. They would do anything for food, climb into a backpack at night, even with Root there. He would sit up and growl, and then he'd lie back down. He knew his own food was buried in a place, in a tub, safe. I never got up in the night to pee because I didn't want to see the raccoons. They knew I was scared, so they'd attack me first. Animals could tell. One night on the way to our spot, we surprised them raiding a trash pile. They looked up at us, chunks of bread in their miniature hands like they were at a restaurant. We were bothering them. Ash threw a small rock, but they just stared at us and then they started eating again. I didn't want them showing up outside my sleeping bag in the middle of the night, picking at me with their tiny nails and their pinpoint eyes. I had a fear of raccoons that Ash said was a sign I was losing it. He didn't mean anything by that because he didn't know about my mom. Still, I got quiet. He might have been right, which is what scared me. How did I know I wasn't born with something that was going to take over my brain? It was there in my mom making her someone I didn't know. There could be grains of it inside of me, spreading, waiting to take hold. I had trouble getting myself to sleep even before I'd seen the kid die. At night, something was always rustling nearby or creeping. Leaves crackled. There were coyotes and gophers and cats that used to live inside until someone dumped them in the park. They all probably knew about one another, communicated in some weird way while we were sleeping. How much of the world happened like that? I couldn't forget about the howling and the huffing unless I was wasted. I listened for all of it, or I waited for to feel the fog slipping from the air onto me. We'd given up stringing a tarp because the cops cited us for that too. It meant we were camping. Flop on the ground in a bag, and you could say that you were just hanging out. Ash got a clock from Goodwill, and he set it for 3:55 in the morning, when we would stand up wrapped in our sleeping bags and stumble out to the street. The cops came by our end of the park at 4 and cited anyone who looked asleep. Most mornings we could climb back in our bags for a few hours, and before the park rangers came through with their bikes, headlamps clamped on their foreheads. They went out of their way to climb up the hill. They weren't going to give us tickets, but they weren't going to let us stay there either. Hope motioned around the soggy nest of leaves and mud. "We figured you weren't making it in tonight," she said. Fleet was still asleep, scrunched up in a blanket. Tiny was under her arm. "Root and Tiny are both here. I think we need to celebrate," said Hope. "I got the nuggets," Ash said, "but I dropped the light back on the street." Fleet sat up, put Tiny in her lap, and reached for a book of matches at the bottom of her bag. "Emergency supplies," she said. Ash took out a joint, wet a finger in his mouth, and smoothed the paper. There was a sharp smell of sulfur as he lit the match, and then a small glow near his face. He exhaled slowly and then took another hit. "Hello," said Hope, reaching for her turn. "Hang on, you'll get yours," he said. Hope stood and grabbed it. She turned her back to him, and he crossed his arms over his chest and smiled the way he did when he was lit up. Hope nudged Fleet, who took her turn, and handed it to me. The fog was settling on the trees, making its way through the sleeping bag around my shoulders. I put on an extra coat and another pair of socks, but I was shivering. In Los Angeles, the fog sealed in the heat and sat on your skin. Here it pushed and pulled you in every direction, and it worked its way inside. Ash took a kazoo out of his pack and started screeching on it. Hope slapped it out of his hand, and it flew over the tree branch into the dark. "You should play that thing when you get hassled. It's scary," said Hope. She and Fleet lay down and looked up through the fog at the fuzzed patches of stars that they could see. Root was digging in the dirt furiously. I leaned against the tree, staring out to see if someone was out there, about to make a move on me. The light from the joint went around in a triangle, from Ash to Fleet to Hope. Who knows why we all found one another? It happened. It was one of those things you don't expect or maybe even deserve.
Thank you, Kathy. I loved your book, by the way. It's wonderful. Yeah. Let's see, my question to you, that is why did you set your novel in not just San Francisco, but San Francisco's Golden Gate Park specifically?
I set it there because, well, I have lived in the Haight for a really long time. And one night coming home through the park, saw a murder. And a guy jumped in front of our car and it begged us to stop. I was with my husband, and who had been an ER doctor, actually. And the guy, we stopped. He pointed in a corner near some trees, and we looked over there, and my husband ran over there, and it was a guy who was 20, turns out he was 25 years old, and he was gasping for his last breath. And it turns out the guy had killed him. And the thing is, I had been in this park so much, and I had, taken my kids to the children's playground. I had taken I just had spent so much time with the buffalo every part you could go to. But it occurred to me how little I knew about the park, and also when the cops didn't pursue it. I ended up following it as a journalist and sort of finding out about the guy and where he came from, and nobody really knew what he was doing there. And I said to the cop who was investigating, "Why did you let this go?" And he said, "Well, if you ask me," he said, "they were both living in the park. They were homeless and they were up to no good." And so I realized that I wanted to take a look at the park in a different way. And that's what I set out to do. And the
Oh,
people.
wow. So both the victim and the person who killed him were
Yeah,
living in the
in
park
real
at the
life,
time.
the people have
Right.
nothing to do with the people who actually were involved in this. But in real life, the guy who killed the kid was in his 60s, and the kid
Oh,
who
yeah.
died, the guy who died was 25. And they never, I took it as far as I could, looking at all these court records and stuff, but they never, they just said, well, it's just one of those things. They had a fight and we'll never know. And, there's a whole world happening in the park. And so I spent a lot of time in the park after that, trying to look at it as, my characters might have looked at it, not looking at it the way I had, seen it. So
Thank you. That's
thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you. And now I would like to turn to Lori Ann Doyle. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Lori, a longtime Grotto member. Lori Ann Doyle is the author of World Gone Missing, which New York Times best-selling writer Eden Lepucki praised for delivering an astute portrayals of people desiring connection, hope, and renewal, even when there is none to be found. She's the winner of the Alligator Juniper National Fiction Award, a nominee for Best of the Net and the Pushcart Prize. Over 25 of her short stories and essays have been published in journals such as McSweeney's, Alta Magazine, Under the Sun, the Los Angeles Review, and elsewhere. When she's not teaching at the Writers' Grotto in San Francisco, she's hard at work finishing up her book of historical fiction, Ash and Light. And Lori, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Yes, I'm going to read from that novel, Ash and Light, which I'm happy to say is newly finished. And here, yeah, cause for celebration. Here we meet Sara Gilardi talking with Enrico Caruso, the singer Enrico Caruso, at a party after the performance of Carmen at the Grand Opera House on Mission Street. It's midnight on the evening of April 17th, 1906, about 5 hours before the earthquake will hit. Your Italian tells me you're from the north, Signorina. Caruso leans closer to Sara to be heard over the noise of the crowd. And where might that be? She can't help but marvel at the sound of Caruso's voice, how it can go from this low, long-voweled Neapolitan to the mind-numbing heights she had heard at the opera house earlier. She glances at her husband Lorenzo, who's just returned from the bar and appears to be deep in conversation with not one but two men, all of them sitting close at the far end of the table. She lets herself exhale. We're from Switzerland, she tells Caruso, near Lake Maggiore. Her father was recruited by the Italian-Swiss Colony Wine Company in California, she says, became one of its vintners, and then started a winery of his own. Oliveto, it's called, she says, though she doubts Caruso has ever heard of it. Wine, he sighs. What would we do without it? Caruso pushes away his glass of champagne and fills an empty one with Zinfandel. He takes a long drink. Would you prefer wine, Miss Gilardi, or shall I call you Sara? It's no secret that Caruso is a ladies' man. People say he flirts with one woman, then courts another in full view of the first. If the rumors are to be believed, he keeps lovers in cities all over the world. Paris, Buenos Aires, and of course, New York. A few are opera singers like his wife, but many, most Sarah's heard, are not. Yes, Sarah says, both to the glass of wine and his calling her Sarah. And now you live here in the city? No, she stops herself from telling him she lives in Healdsburg because that place he will never have heard of either. A few hours north. Then I suppose you have found a hotel for the night. May I inquire as to which one? The boldness of his question surprises her. Perhaps the rules of polite society, she thinks, do not apply to men as famous as he. Perhaps he follows no rules at all. Caruso's eyes gleam. There are so many fine hotels in San Francisco. Across the table, Lorenzo frowns at her. But what harm can there be in telling Caruso that they're staying at the Palace, the luxurious hotel that dominates half a block of Market Street? On the 7th floor, she says, joking that it truly is un palazzo. Caruso is staying there too, she knows. The entire Metropolitan Opera Company has settled in for the duration of their San Francisco tour. An elderly lady in the Grand Court told her this as Lorenzo was checking in at the desk. But with 800 rooms and dozens of corridors, the old woman sighed, we're unlikely to catch even a glimpse of him. Sarah gives Lorenzo a quick smile and turns away. Caruso picks up a pen and begins sketching on the tablecloth. You don't mind, do you? He asks. Sarah's heard about Caruso's caricatures, portraits he likes to dash off on starched napkins, whatever's close at hand, a habit restaurant owners dislike, but always tolerate in the great man's case. Before she can nod yes, the line of her nose and upper lip appear on the fabric. Then a curl that's escaped from the mass pinned high on her head. Caruso crowns her with a tiara that isn't there. He adds the curve of her breast. Cara. Sarah looks up to see Lorenzo looming above her. Darling, he says, gripping the back of her chair. We should go. Our train leaves early in the morning. Prego, signore, just one moment more. Caruso adds the slope of her neck, then draws a flash of earring. The dark hairs on Lorenzo's head look as if they're about to burst into flame. Sarah watches his anger rise, ready to send hot, bright spikes across the room that would hit the ceiling and come roaring back. But even Lorenzo wouldn't start an argument here in front of the famous Caruso. The maestro fills in her dress with thin black strokes and finishes the portrait. He signs it with a flourish, the E and the C rising high above the other letters, then pens a line of numbers underneath his signature. The date, Sarah imagines, written as an Italian would, 17/4/06. But upside down, she can't make it out. Scissors appear from nowhere, and Caruso cuts the drawing out of the linen tablecloth. He offers it to Sarah. With my admiration, signorina. Grazie, Lorenzo says bitterly. Mille grazie. The smell of not wine but whiskey fills the air. He reaches over Sarah, takes a sketch, and jams it in his pocket. He pulls her towards the door.
Yeah, thank you. What I wanted to ask you is why, what drew you to set your novel at the turn of the century in San Francisco? Was it what was happening right then? Was it Caruso? Was it combination? What was it?
Yeah, well, I just want to say there's this assumption that writers consciously pick the setting for their work. But my experience has been exactly the opposite. It seems the setting of my stories pick me. And this new novel is a case in point. I've lived most of my life outside the biggest cities in the US, LA, New York City, San Francisco. But San Francisco is a place that caught my imagination. I find its contrast spectacular. Hills, high rises, a massive green space, all set on the edge of a tumultuous ocean. In 1906, San Francisco was the crown jewel of the West, the largest city west of the Mississippi, and 4 times bigger than sleepy Los Angeles. I bet a lot of you in the audience know that. But I was just drawn to that era because it was such a pivotal point in San Francisco's history. Some say the devastation brought on by the earthquake of 1906. Over 80% of San Francisco's buildings were burned or damaged. That paved the way for LA to become the dominant powerhouse that it is now. So I wanted to capture San Francisco at this important turning point and pair it with the turning point that the disaster brought on of the marriage of Sarah and Lorenzo.
Interesting.
So that's how I would answer your question, Kathy.
That's right. Interesting.
Well, great. Thank you all for reading. As you were all reading, I was thinking to myself, I've done a lot of panels, and it's fairly rare that I'm on a panel with 3 people whose work I very much greatly admire. And I think you all know that I'm fans of your writing. I think I've told you at some point. And so it's wonderful to be here discussing setting with you guys. If for those of you in the audience, if you'd like to submit a question for us, please put it in the Q&A. It can be to everyone. It can be to someone specific. We have a few questions of our own that we can sort of start talking about. I think let's start generally to us. How important is place in your work? And anyone can speak up. If no one does, then I'll point.
Well, I wrote a whole essay on this, and in some, I just want to say that when I was in my MFA program, one of the profs said, setting, you can put that in later. And I was like, oh, really? And then,
Really?
but yeah, well, my experience has really been the opposite. And for me, setting is revelatory of character. It's somehow like imagining the setting and how the characters would react to that setting really helps me dig, more at who they are, what they care about, all of that. So to me, setting is not a second class, fictive element. It's actually, incredibly crucial. So yeah, in some.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. I mean, it informs the character so much. I can't imagine adding it in after the fact. It seems weird to me.
It's like its own character, right?
Yeah,
I
me
can't
too.
either. Because, but some there are so many examples though of a setting that's I don't know if I say less dynamic, if that makes sense. I mean, because something can happen in a closet, in which case that's very important, but it might not change. But yeah, I agree. I think setting just, reveals character, theme, mood. It can be, it's essential.
The other thing is I wanted to say is that, Kathy's book actually inspired me to think very deeply about Golden Gate Park because, there were thousands of refugees there after the earthquake. And so it was full of people. But also those people, as the homeless people who live in the park know very well, there is a world of nature there that exists, well beyond, I think, human, not experience, but like what we take in and day out as we walk down the trails or whatever. So there's a way that setting opens up not only human beings, but kind of the, existence beyond, us as people.
Yeah, I think setting for me, I always have to know where the characters are. It can't just be, small town USA or whatever. It has to be very specific. But I think a question I have for all of you, because I'll admit right now that I'm somewhat of a coward when it comes to setting. I don't, I am afraid to set any of my stories in a place that I don't know well. And I think that's to my own detriment. I think that I should be able to set stories or books in places where I haven't lived. I think it's limiting. But I do have this fear of being called out for it. I don't want someone to go, "Oh, obviously Dominic has never lived in Pittsburgh or whatever because he would know this or that." And I don't I'm hesitant to say that any amount of like research without actually being there for some amount of time will compensate for that gap in knowledge. What do you all think about that?
Yeah, I don't know that I've really written about places that I haven't spent a lot of time in. Not because of out of fear, I think, but just I don't know, wouldn't interest me.
It doesn't interest you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just would, I think I share your feelings about that, Dominic. My new novel is set in Los Angeles, where I, had lived for a while. So yeah, I think it's hard to do that, but not impossible. And I think
Yeah.
anyway, gets into the question of, writing, you know, you're writing fiction. It has to seem real. It has to be real. It has to seem authentic. But I don't know.
Well, the
That's a
thing I
big.
would throw out is that San Francisco, I think, is one of the most challenging places to write in terms of setting
Mm,
because
Mm.
of the micro climates,
mm,
because of
Oh.
and as I was writing, I was like, one book, the nonfiction book would say, "Oh, it was raining," and then another nonfiction book would say, "Oh, it wasn't raining." And, I realized in San Francisco, a lot of the time that is true. It's raining in one place and not raining in another place. And so I had to just really, go. Obviously, I went to the park a lot. I saw the earthquake cottages. I went to, um, you know, down, although like where the library is right now, that was just flattened, completely flattened. I mean, the whole downtown was just leveled, mostly from the fire. But, so I couldn't go back to that setting. But in terms of there was a dividing line between on Van Ness, like one east of, excuse me, yes, east of Van Ness was obliterated and west of Van Ness was saved. And I just thought, wow, that is amazing. So I wanted to visit there. And so I guess in summary, I would say that my feeling about setting is it's like character. You will never know it well enough. But you still have to keep, digging and trying and figuring it out and accepting that particularly in San Francisco, it's like there's so many intricacies of light and everything. Yeah. Fog. Somebody just wrote in the chat, fog. I mean, there's just so many elements of San Francisco in terms of its environment. Not to say that's not true of other cities, but I just think these microclimates, I was intimidated by them, frankly.
Well, also, as Doug's story showed, how different things are seen by different people, so differently. So somebody else would have gotten on the bus and thought something completely different than the characters that you were writing about. So, that's a lot of it too, is this city, not only the climate is different, but the neighborhoods are different, and um, you know,
Oh, yeah. No,
everything's
South of
different. People
Market.
are so passionate about their neighborhoods, and so, it's like being in 7 different countries.
That's so true.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, part of what, I feel like I was sort of hindered by being a journalist, and in some ways helped, because what I actually did was really go to these places that I had seen so many times and really try to just, I have a colleague named Dale Maharaj who says he calls what he does method journalism. And I sort of tried to borrow from him and that, and just sort of, I was really trying to see things through different eyes in places that I knew so well, including spending days in the emergency room at San Francisco General, just sitting there. The people, they try to kick me out. They go, "Excuse me, are you waiting for someone to," And I just wanted to sit and feel what
Wow.
it felt like, to see it as people who were there in an emergency felt like, even though I had been there, as a reporter, and it was different. So I think, anyway.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good lead into one of the other questions I had, as to what kind of research do you do about setting? I mean, one kind of research obviously is living there, which we all live in the Bay Area, but that's amazing that you actually did that, Kathy. What other
Well,
things
I
have
would
people
want,
done?
I just think what would this, not to see it as me, which to see it as a
Yeah.
character, which if I'd written many novels before, maybe that would have come more easily. But I
Well, and
really,
that sounds very well. I mean, you just called it method journal, which I'm fine. I'm now making the connection. Yeah, that's what really good
right,
actors would do as well, right? They would try to,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
walk in the shoes of whoever they're going to be portraying, and try to go through their lives and see what they would see through their eyes. I love that. And how can I write this off? Like, should I put my next novel in in Tahiti? I think. See, I need to live there for a while.
Definitely.
Well,
What else have other people done? Yeah, Lori.
um, well, for me, setting is so linked to sensory details, and that it's not just the visuals, it's the smells, it's
Yeah.
um the taste, the feel of the air, all of that is like so vital, and setting is such a rich element to layer with those sensory details. I think that's great. But I had the, in a way, I would say pleasure, because both of my characters, Lorenzo and Sarah, are from Healdsburg, so they were just down to see the opera. Of course, those plans got upended, but the point is that they didn't know the city very well. So when I went to do my research, I had to look at it through the eyes of someone who, like, I don't know what street this is, versus, somebody else who would be like, this is a place they know like the back of their hand. And again, we're just saying setting and character is so linked in writing. But so yeah, yeah,
And setting depends on the character too, right? Like a
yeah.
child would view San Francisco completely different. I mean, you were just talking about this, Kathy, but I'm just thinking about age, too. Like I'm starting to think about my third novel, and what does the United States, or what does Virginia look like to a Filipino immigrant versus someone, who was brought up there. That's something that I'm currently thinking about. Doug, where your YA novel that you're working on, where is it set?
Yeah, so it's set here in San Francisco.
Oh, you go, great. Yeah.
And it's about giant robots. And they use the unused Munir BART subway tunnels and abandoned stations where the robots launch from. So there was some
Cool.
research in terms of like, yeah, because there are some finding those. A lot of them are in the Castro. There's not a lot, but they're in the Castro area, and then making up other ones, thinking like, well, I want some out here. How do the lines match up? Well, how do we make a unused tunnel out here. And that was a lot of fun to think about this kind of unused San Francisco that does exist and how might more of it exist. It was also fun.
Oh,
I want to go
awesome.
back to something Lori was saying, and maybe this ties in to the idea of not writing about places I don't know. Is I think at the very core, like writing a setting is actually really fun. And so I would hate to not do it. That doesn't make sense to me because I enjoy it. It's really fun. And I think that's why I wouldn't write about some place I don't know, because I don't think I would find that fun unless I knew it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's less about fear than more about fun.
Right. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Um, okay, let me see. Well, no questions in Q&A so far, I think, but I do have another question for our panelists. What are some of your favorite books that have been set in San Francisco, either that have influenced your work or that you just think are just great books set in San Francisco, or that makes great use of San Francisco as a setting, or the San Francisco Bay Area, that is?
Well, I think, of course, Tales of the City, a book
Yes.
I come back to all the time, over and over. Not
Mhm.
only for setting and characters, but also the structure of it, although it was serialized, the shape of it is very cool and interesting to me. During the pandemic, this kind of short story collection I was talking about, Notes from the Miscast, sort of modeled after Tales of the City. I come
Ah,
back to that book over and over, books over
Tales
and
of the
over.
City by Armistead Maupin.
Maupin, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Lori and Kathy? Yeah.
I'd have to say, and it's not fiction, but Joan Didion's Slouching Towards Bethlehem, which I would have to, you know, mention because I'd read it many times, and that the title story takes place in the Haight in 1960s. 1967, I think, is when it is. And her descriptions of the street, the kids, what she's trying to express it was also new then. And so I really, that really strikes me. Of course, she it was very unconventional journalism because she put herself into it, which was very unusual at the time. But I just thought it was, her take on what was exactly going on then, and just the physical descriptions of place. Of course, well, like fiction, she had a strong point of view going into it. That's one of the reasons also it was so, unconventional. Her capturing of the youth that she spoke to is so filtered through her own eyes, unlike conventional journalism. But I just really that really made an impression on me, and I tried to really get that out of my head when I was writing, but that has been an important book to me.
I really
Lori, what
love
about you?
Damascus by Joshua Moore, which is he called
Oh,
love
yeah.
letter to the Mission District. And
Yeah.
again, I don't feel like I know the Mission very well, but of course, we have Babylon in the Mission. We've had Babylon in the Mission for 17 years. No, that's not true. We had it around Union Square for a while. But he seems to capture so well the love part. Like, it's raunchy, but it's also so full of love, and he's got his characters dumpster diving and doing all kinds of crazy things. And finding redemption at the end. But that book could not exist without, it being set in my opinion, being set in the Mission.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Josh Moore used to be a member of the Writers' Grotto. Isn't that correct, Lori?
Yes, he
In
did.
fact, Josh was one of my first writing teachers ever, and it was one of the first classes I ever took, which was at the Grotto. Along around the same time I was taking a class from you, Lori. I think maybe even earlier, actually. Great teacher, very interesting guy. Gosh, and he's an amazing writer.
No, and he's got I think a trio of murder mysteries out. So check it out.
Yeah. He just came, and it's got a rock album associated with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, like a Viking crime trilogy. Very interesting.
Josh can pull it off.
Yeah, he can.
He's so great.
Yeah, I actually so my books are technically romance. They're in the romance genre. And one of the books that I really found clicked with mine in many ways is a book by Taline Voskuni, who is she is a Bay Area author. She's Armenian, and this book, I mean, you can tell, right? Like the Golden Gate Bridge is right there. I mean, it takes place all around San Francisco and the various parts of San Francisco, but from the viewpoint of the Armenian community, which I didn't know a single thing about it, you know. And she makes such great use of, and what I also love is that she describes, it's such a little thing, but she describes the distances between places, like how long it takes to get from one neighborhood to another. And it sort of gives you an idea of how big or how small the Bay Area can be, because, you know, San Francisco itself is actually kind of small, right, in terms of being a metropolis. So I love these little details that she puts in, and also weather is such, and the temperature is such a huge part, is also another character, because it's always affecting what they wear and how they feel, and you know, so it's a fantastic book.
Good title.
Okay, well, what is it? The title is called Sorry, Bro.
I love the title.
Sorry, Bro. And it's a sapphic rom-com. It's really great. Really, really great. Let's see, what else do we got? No other questions, but I do have another one for us. Let's see.
I think we're at 7.
Oh yeah, we're at 7. Yes, we are. Okay. Yes. So does anyone have any Q&A questions? I haven't seen any, is the thing. None yet. Do any of you have any other questions too? Let me pick another one that I can find. I think we answered the ones that we came up with.
Well, or what about books that have really impressed you, that just rely on place, or the sense of place is so strong, not necessarily San Francisco, but
Not Cincinnati, okay.
yeah, that you've learned from, that you know, what does anything stand out? Because I do have a few.
Oh yeah, what would those be, Kathy?
Well, you know, one that I read fairly recently, Northwoods by Daniel Mason, which is just
Oh, right.
yeah, that takes place, you know, in the Northeast, in the woods. And I loved his descriptions of the actual place, which is as important, if not more important, than the people who, it's a novel about the people over hundreds of years who cycle through this piece of property, this land, before there was a house there, then when there's a house there, and then it follows the lives of these people, and really leaves you with a feeling of that humans have such a tiny lifespan. You know, we're here for such a small amount of time, that it's nature and maybe what we leave behind, whether it's structure or destruction or whatever we do, the climate, that matters, has more of an impact than a single human life. And I love the way he did that through place. So
That reminds, there's a movie coming out soon called Here. Have you heard of it? Starring with Tom Hanks. And the gist of the, if you watch the trailer, you'll see, but the gist of the movie is that basically is one frame across like millions of years, but mostly in the modern area, where it's just where it ends up in the modern area is like a living room. And you just see the lives of these generations of people, you know, going through this one frame of setting, which I thought was well, let's see how it works out, but I thought that was fascinating just to see the settings stay the same, but like everything around it changing.
We do
Yeah.
have a couple of questions. We have a question from Sophia in the chat, and then also one from Beth in the Q&A.
Nice. Let's do it.
Yeah, thank you both for.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Beth says, what is a favorite personal detail or memory about the Bay Area that you've worked into your writing? That's a great question. I'm thinking.
For me, at least in the new book, I work in a lot of my favorite food. So there's a lot of like
Oh,
boba
yeah.
teas and sushi
Yes.
burritos and things like that.
Yeah, I did the same. I did
Yeah.
one of my major scenes in All the Right Notes is at, oh no, I can't remember the name. It's that cafe in North Berkeley that has the souffle pancakes. What is the name of that? Does anyone in the I gotta look it up. But yeah, I love that place and it's so hard to get a seat, but I had to put the setting there. That's one of mine. What about you
Cool.
guys, Lori and Kathy?
Well, I would say some of the peculiar things in the park that I mean people know about, but that I have a real thing for the buffalo, the bison. It's just so odd that it's wrong that they're there, but it's so there's just something about it. You know, every time I'm near there, I live near the park, I just go see those bison a lot. And
They
I'm
show up in my novel.
Cool.
glad to know that. And then the various little spots that people take care of, like the dahlia garden, you know, the rhododendron dell in the dahlia garden, that
Yeah.
have these whole societies of people. That, I mean, that's not so much in the book, it's just that there are these places that are whole worlds that exist that it just sort of fascinates me. Do you know, I mean, there's a whole Dahlia Society in San Francisco. It's this whole group of people that their whole, you know, what they do on the weekends is they take care of these dahlias, for, you know, because they are passionate about them. And I love that.
Yeah, I do
So I
too.
had to work in these little not odd, but unusual sections of the park.
Well, it wasn't hard, but Lottie's Fountain on the corner of Kearney Street. And also, there's something really entrancing to me about when you walk by the windmills at the edge of the park and you cross the Great Highway, and it truly does seem to me there to be a great highway. And then you're into an even wilder place, Ocean Beach, or a part of Ocean Beach. And Ocean Beach is so raw and so, for me, a little scary. It's like,
Scary. Yeah.
yeah, the waves are really violent, and they're not always, but seem to be. There can be fog there, which makes it even a little spookier. But both of those places, I wouldn't say I worked it in, but it was just like I was drawn to writing about it because there are places I love, and I learned a lot about. Forgive me, I can't remember if it's Lottie's Fountain or Lotta's Fountain. But you know, it's still there. It was different during right after the '06 quake. I think they did some renovations to it recently. And of course, most people know this, that was the place where the earthquake survivors would meet every year. Unfortunately, we don't have any left. So it was a very important place because all the water mains, again, most of you know this, the water mains were broken. So the water was in short supply, and people went to Lotta's Fountain to get to get a drink of water. I mean, that's how
Wow.
what a disaster it was.
Lori, your comments about the windmills reminded me. Has anyone read the Zatanna? Does anyone know who Zatanna is? Zatanna, the DC superhero. She's like the magician. She has a top hat and a vest.
Of
Yes,
course I
okay, so
do.
Dominic knows. So she had her series for a while. This is maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, but it took place in San Francisco. And maybe that author or illustrator is local, but it took place in San Francisco. And the windmills at Golden Gate Park kept the dragons asleep under San Francisco. That was the whole purpose of the windmills, to keep the sleeping dragons asleep.
I love
Anyway, yeah, I love it too.
Wow.
what a great idea. Laura, you said there's a question.
Yeah, so
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Yeah, go
Beth
ahead.
had a question about, and then also Sophia had a question about
Shakespeare, is this the one you're talking
Shakespeare.
about?
Yeah.
I'm also curious about, okay, let me read the whole thing. I totally agree with what people are saying, how setting draws out characters. And I'm also curious about how Shakespeare's plays are often moved around settings. And I wonder what you think about that. Well, my husband is the Shakespeare aficionado, and unfortunately I'm not, so I don't know what to say about that. Anyone else?
Well, I'd say, that book, The Great Night, that's what one of the things books I was gonna mention too, because it by
Yeah.
Chris Adrian, which takes place in the other park right near where I live, Buena Vista Park. And reimagine, it takes place on Midsummer's Eve in, I can't remember the year, it's fairly contemporary, but it, reimagines Midsummer Night's Dream. And so, and I think he really makes use of that, idea. So, so that, and also, in the park, there's a lake, which is now called Blue Heron Lake. They changed the name. And so they have the local Shakespeare company has done As You Like It at the top, which also, really makes use of the changing of setting, this sort of very dynamic change of settings. So, those two things.
We also have a question from the YouTube stream. I think this might be a good question to close out on if we don't get any more questions from the audience. And it's a great question because it's about craft and it's applicable to everyone. Do you guys ever get writer's block? And how do you get past it? A deadline? That's how you get past it. Well, you just have to write it. That's my answer.
Yeah, so I have had writer's block. So in the novel, there's a big scene, there's a big kiss-in. Characters organize a kiss-in, they're going to protest something's going on in their neighborhood. And I knew that in that one scene, the chapter was going to rotate in point of view around all the characters within the same scene. And I knew that was what I wanted to happen, but I was totally stuck on how to write it. And it took forever and forever, and I just could not break through. Then I met another writer who writes Star Wars, like young adult Star Wars novels. And he told me that whenever he gets stuck, he draws the scene. He just like draws it out.
Wow.
And so I went back and I drew out the bar where the kissing was going to take place, where all the characters were. Here's the jukebox. They're going to enter here. They're going to move here. And it totally worked. It totally broke me through on that chapter, and the whole thing just started coming out. So,
Wow.
yeah, that's the advice I
I've
give now.
never
If
heard
you're
of
blocked.
that. That's amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So yeah,
So
just I
cool.
guess draw it, change mediums, try to express it in a different way. Drawing
Wow.
it totally worked for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have experienced writer's block. I think we all have to some degree.
all have.
And I have found a couple things have been helpful. One is I pose a question to a character before I go to sleep. So just as I'm lying down, getting ready to go to sleep, I'm like, what do you want to happen in this scene? Or whatever, what does happen in this scene? And I don't know, somehow it doesn't always work, but often around, that time when you're waking up and things are more
Yep.
unfiltered, like
Yep.
the answer will come.
I love that.
Yeah. So kind of mailing a question to your unconscious.
I've done writer's block, and I'd say worse for me is revision confusion, revision
Yeah.
mania.
I agree.
Like maybe I should have done it this way, or what if I did it that way? So what I do when I get stuck in that circle, that sort of circular thinking where I can't decide if I've gone totally wrong, is a similar idea, Lori, is that I write journal entries in the voice of the character. And so that can help, because I realize that I'm stuck because I really am not inside the voice of the character as much as I need to be. So it really, that has helped me. And I often do that.
You're great. The advice I generally hear is not as effective, which is step away from it, go for a walk, da 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 da. And I mean, though that works, time and space, but these seem much more like proactive, which I love, and I'm going to absolutely try these. But Lori, I love that twilight time is some of my best ideas come at that 3:30 wake up to go to the bathroom. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's some of the best ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Kathy really makes a great point, because I think that revision, it takes a different kind of courage, because it feels like, well, I made a choice. Now you want me to make another choice? The choices begin to feel infinite. And so I think this idea of again of, well, I think most of us know this, but it's worth reminding ourselves to have faith in our writing, to have faith in
Yeah.
that, it will come. That's one thing. And the other is that, the characters are in the driver's seat, not necessarily our intellects. So that I find that useful. But and here's the third thing. There's many, somebody said to me once, there's always more than one elegant solution to a problem.
Mm.
And that's obvious, right? So, but the thing
Yeah.
is, I would say that's true of revision too. There's always more than one elegant solution to a revision question. So it
Yeah.
isn't for me, it lowers the stakes. There's many possibilities out
Many
there.
good ideas. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, good. I think we'll go ahead and close out before I hand this over to the SF Public Library, who I want to thank so much for hosting us tonight for this discussion. I'd like to go around and if you can just let everyone know where you can be found online, if you have a website or social media handle, however you'd like to answer the question. But for people who'd like to know a little bit more about you, where can they find you? Doug, how about you?
Yes, I'm at doughendersonauthor.com.
Great.
I'm at
Lori.
laurieanndoyle.com. And before I forget, Dom, I just want to thank you for doing such an excellent moderating.
Oh,
It's really great.
you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
And I'm at, surprisingly, CatherineSeligman.com. And I also want to thank you for doing that, and
You're
thank the
welcome.
library
Sure.
too.
Yes, thank the library.
Yes. Thank
One
you
of
so
the
much.
one of the scenes in my book, one of the chapters takes place in the local library. So my branch.
Yay.
So I'm
Yeah.
a
Library fan, as I think we all are. And people can find me on at dominiclim.com. That's my website. So that is it. Thank you, SFPL. Is someone going to come on and just maybe say goodbye? Any last notes? Any last words? Nope. All right.
I think we lost our moderator, but I'll come
Okay.
on. Say bye, everybody.
Okay, that's
Thank
fine.
you for joining us. I'm your tech host, Michelle. Don't forget to sign up for the November 19th Night at the Grotto 2. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thanks,
night,